Look at the view of the harbour from up here.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
The morning in Sydney did not announce the end, but rather a deceptive state of perfection. By 7 a.m., the sun bathed the white shells of the Sydney Opera House in a golden, almost celestial glow. At Circular Quay, the green and yellow ferries sliced through the deep blue water with mathematical precision, carrying hundreds of commuters who barely looked up from their coffee and newspapers. It was the very image of modern civilization, stable, secure, and seemingly invincible. In the distance, the harbor bridge stood as a steel sentinel, overlooking a city that moved with the rhythm of prosperity. Along the famous shoreline of Bondi Beach, the atmosphere was one of absolute serenity. Groups of adults were out for their morning rituals. Joggers pounded the wet sand in a rhythmic cadence, and yoga practitioners held their poses against the backdrop of a waking ocean. In the water, surfers floated like silent sentinels on their boards, waiting for a swell that seemed to be dreaming. There were no children on the beach that morning, only the vibration of an adult city, preparing for a day of business and leisure. No one imagined that thousands of miles beneath the surface of the Tasman Sea, the tectonic plates had decided to shift. It wasn't a loud explosion, but a silent movement of billions of tons of rock that released energy equivalent to 1,000 atomic bombs, sending an invisible pulse of displacement racing toward the Australian coast. The first sign of the impending catastrophe did not come from the sky, but from the abyss. Around 9:15 a.m., the surfers at Bondi noticed something deeply unsettling. The tide wasn't rising, it was vanishing. In less than 2 minutes, the shoreline retreated more than 300 meters, exposing a lunar landscape of hidden reefs, kelp-covered rocks, and deep-sea fish flopping desperately on the dry sand. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any thunder. In the lifeguard towers, binoculars trembled in the hands of seasoned professionals. Their eyes could not process the horizon. The blue line of the sea had transformed into a dark, rising mountain range that grew taller with every passing second. Suddenly, the city's emergency system roared to life. An electronic shriek shattered the morning calm as the tsunami sirens, perched atop the skyscrapers, emitted a long, mournful wail. On every digital billboard in Darling Harbour and on every smartphone in the city, a message appeared in flashing red letters. Tsunami warning. Immediate evacuation to high ground. This is not a drill. The police began to mobilize with frantic urgency, their patrol cars racing along the coast with loudspeakers blaring. Everyone leave the beach now. Move to high ground. Get to the upper floors immediately. The initial confusion quickly curdled into raw panic. People began to run, not toward the sea, but away from it, their eyes fixed on the giant shadow that was now beginning to blot out the sun. At 9:45 a.m., the ocean returned to reclaim the city. What arrived was not a wave in the traditional sense, but a wall of debris, energy, and liquid fury. The tsunami struck the mouth of the harbor with a force that made the foundations of the CBD's rascacielos vibrate. From news helicopters circling above, journalists shouted into their microphones as they witnessed the impossible. "Oh my God, it's crossing the barrier. Sydney is being gulped." The Sydney Opera House was the first to take the hit. The water surged over the iconic white sails, shattering the reinforced glass shells as if they were made of parchment. The ferries, which minutes before were symbols of order, were lifted by the massive volume of water and hurled against the concrete wharves, turning into metal projectiles that crushed everything in their path. The water surged into the city streets with the velocity of a freight train. On George Street, the current carried massive red and blue shipping containers that had been torn from the port. These steel blocks acted as battering rams, smashing into the glass facades of luxury hotels and office buildings, creating a symphony of destruction and electrical explosions. People in the streets scrambled for the emergency stairs of the high-rises, while the water rose meter by meter in mere seconds. The roar was deafening, a chaotic mix of rushing water, grinding metal, and the groans of the city's infrastructure being pulverized. The skyscrapers became glass islands surrounded by a wild, brown river of mud, urban furniture, vehicles, and the wreckage of a normal morning. Under a sky that had turned charcoal gray, punctuated by torrential rain and fierce lightning, the tsunami showed no signs of relenting. It pushed deep into the urban core, flooding underground parking garages and subway tunnels, trapping the modern world under a layer of marine oblivion. The sea was not just advancing, it was repossessing the land. The pressure of the water was so immense that it buckled the asphalt of the streets from beneath, and large sharks and deep-sea creatures were swept into the lobbies of five-star hotels. High above, the screams of the wind vied with the desperate shouts of those stranded on upper floors, watching as their city disappeared beneath a churning violent tide. By noon, the roar had subsided into a somber, heavy splashing. The water began to retreat slowly, but what it left behind was not Sydney. It was a graveyard of concrete, salt, and mud. The silence that settled over the city was heavier than the wave itself. From the air, the view was harrowing. The harbor was covered in a carpet of debris that stretched as far as the eye could see. The Sydney Harbor Bridge remained as a tired giant over a sea of sludge, its lower pylons scarred by the impact of boats and buildings. There was no traffic, only the distant lonely echo of sirens from ambulances and fire crews operating on the high ridges of the city. The interior of the Opera House was filled with silt, sea wreckage, and tangled kelp, its architectural beauty marred by the raw power of the Pacific. Emergency boats now navigated the streets that had been turned into canals, searching for survivors among the floating remains of city life. A large cargo ship sat strangely aground in the middle of a public park, surrounded by overturned cars and uprooted eucalyptus trees. There were no shouts now, only the crackle of emergency radios breaking the still air. Sector 4 secure. We need more units for structural assessment. The city is gone. As the sun began to set over a ruined skyline, the lights of Sydney remained dark. Only the reflection of the moon on the stagnant, muddy water remained, while the world watched in horror at how nature, in a single silent shrug of the earth, could erase a century of civilization. The silent catastrophe had concluded, leaving behind a scar that the world would never forget.
All units, establish a perimeter around the collapse zone. We need a structural assessment immediately. Send the drone up for thermal imaging.
Slow approach. Keep the spotlight steady on that structure.
Confirmed, Captain. Possible survivor on the third floor balcony.
Slowly now, grab the rung.
I have it.
We are ready for the next one.